Welcome everyone. I'm Willow Green here with the story behind the story. Today featuring Stacy Juba, who is a freelance developmental editor, online writing instructor, and award-winning journalist. She has written sweet and sassy chick-lit novels, mysteries about determined women sleuths, and entertaining books for young adults and children. Her books include the Storybook Valley chick-lit series and the Hockey Rivals young adult sports novels. Welcome, Stacy. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. So you not only have these different series and all of these skills, but you started this journey as a child. Tell us a little bit more about how you started writing.
I remember writing my first story in third grade. I just loved to read. I loved reading Nancy Drew and Bobbsey Twins, Trixie Belden, and I was very introverted when I was a child. So I was quite a bookworm, and I think starting to write my own stories was a natural progression because it helped me to express myself on paper. And by fifth grade, I was writing a mystery series, and I had a teacher who really encouraged my talent in writing. He was always reading stories to the class or just making a big deal of it, encouraging me to enter contests and just making me feel like I had a special talent for it. So I just kept writing and writing. And then when I was 16, I found out about a competition for teenage writers where the winner would get the book published. So I decided to sit down and to write my first novel with the goal of entering it in this contest.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And so what did you learn as a teenager writing a novel? Like, what a fascinating experience.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging because it was a lot longer than anything I'd written before. The book was called Face Off, and it was a young adult hockey novel about two brothers who don't get along, and they're forced to play on the same high school hockey team. So they kind of learn that playing hockey isn't a one-man show. They have to learn to get along for the benefit of their team, and it was just quite a learning experience. This was back in like 1990, 1989. So it was before the internet. It was before computers. So I wrote it on an electric typewriter, which now looking back, I said, how did writers do it? That was because then every time I made a mistake or wanted to change something, I would have to redo a new copy and white it out. So it was quite different from how I write today. I remember that I hand wrote it first, and I did a lot of it in study hall, and I had a friend who was kind of reading it over my shoulder, and she was encouraging me. But I really learned the most from the editing process. So I entered it in the competition, and then when I was a freshman in college, I found out that it had won. I got a telegram from the editor at Avon Flair Books, which was the young adult division of Avon Books, and just letting me know that I had won and they wanted to publish my novel. But that was really just the start of it. So she went through the book, and then she wound up sending me a very long letter full of suggestions not really suggestions, more like directions to follow for how to make it stronger. And this was like before email really had started or taken off. So they sent back a hard copy of the manuscript with sticky notes flagging different issues. So it's basically always referring to this long 8-page letter. And then also the manuscript, which had writing on it, and it had sticky notes basically on every page. Every page had something. So that was where the real learning came in, because there was just so much rewriting to do to make it stronger. I remember it was a lot of learning how to show more than tell, like having less static descriptions, getting into the characters' heads more. I was really good at dialogue, but I hadn't really developed the skill of getting into the characters' thoughts and point of view. So I had to work on that as far as fleshing out the characters. And it's a lot of things like word choice, using stronger and more vivid words. So that was definitely a learning experience. And then after that, we went back and forth a couple of times. And even then the editor wound up doing some revisions herself to the book. So basically I did a lot of rewrites and revisions, and then she did some more line editing, and then it went to their copy editors, and then it came back to me again, except this time it was flagging smaller errors like grammar, punctuation, and that kind of thing. And then I had to proofread it, proofread the galleys, and they sent me a proof of the cover. So that was really exciting to see the cover. So I just learned a lot about the process. And then afterwards, they sent it out to reviewers, and the publicist from the publicity department called me and did an interview with me so she could write a press release. And I sent it to my local papers, and they sent it some places also. And then I did some research, and I found some reviews in like Publishers Weekly and School Library Journal. So, and then did some book signings. So it was just really really great introduction to the world of book publishing and being an author. It was overwhelming at first. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to pull off this rewrite. And in fact, because I was in college, my dad actually retyped the draft for me, because by then we had a Brother word processor. So at least, definitely not as advanced as computers today, but at least we could save it on a floppy disk so that I didn't have to retype every page every time I made a change or made a typo, or they wanted me to change something else. So at least I could go back onto the word processor and work with it on there. So I was kind of in a panic once I had my initial elation, like, oh, my book's going to be published, this is great. Then it was kind of like, oh my gosh, how am I going to have time to do this? And I was living in a dorm, and I did come on weekends. So I didn't have all I had was this hard copy, which I knew I'd have to retype. So he retyped it for me, so I'd have a baseline to start with. And then I was able to sit down, and I brought the word processor with me to school. I had one at school also, so I could bring the disc back and forth to work on it. So yeah, so it was an adventure.
It sounds like it. Well, and it's interesting too, because you said that you were 16 when you first learned about this contest, and then in college when you actually found out you won. So how long did it take you to actually, from the day you decided to write the book, how long did it take you to actually write it, and how long was it?
I think I started writing it when I was about 16, and it took me several months to write it. I remember sending it off. I think the deadline was in around May or June. So I wrote it during most of my senior year, and then sent it off in the spring. And then I think it was maybe like November or so of my freshman year. So I'd say probably about a year and a half in between, because you had to enter it during a certain time period. So even though I was working on it, I had to wait a while to actually submit it. So I can't remember the exact months, but there was some time in between where I had to wait till it was open for submissions again, because the contest was every other year that they had it. And then found out I won, and then I think they gave me a couple months to do the rewrites. So, and then it was at least 6 to 8 months after that before it came out. So
wow.
Yeah, so it was a long wait to actually see it as a book. I want to say it was closer to like 8 months, maybe not a full year, but it did take a while to actually see it as a published book.
It sounds like it. One of the things you talked about in that process, and it's one of the things you teach too that I want to ask about, please explain show versus tell, because that's a huge one that I think hits home with a lot of writers.
Yeah, I see that in a lot of manuscripts by beginner writers. Basically, it's where there's a few different ways. Like, for example, one way of telling rather than showing is having an information dump, a backstory, where a writer might just go on for a few pages telling us about a character's history. And that just stops the story flat. So it's better to, I mean, backstory is important, but it's better to weave it in smaller bits, just kind of parcel it through so that it's more integrated into the story. A lot of authors tend to just dump it into the story because they want the readers to understand and to know all this background, but so they tell it all in one place. So you really want to parcel it out and find ways, like rather than saying your character is sad or angry, like she felt sad or, you know, he looked angry, show it rather than just telling us, show it through their dialogue and their actions, their body language. If it's your viewpoint character, you could get in their head, get in their, you know, their nonverbal communication, their heart hammering, that kind of thing. So you really want to make sure the story is as active as possible. And then another big area is with description. Some beginner authors have a tendency to just use a lot of passive words like was and were, like the couch was in the corner, the wallpaper had flowers on it, and that's more telling and it's just very static. So it's good to try to use more active words to turn it around so that you're actually like combining the description with some action, more vivid words, so that the reader doesn't feel like you're just sitting there telling them this story, that they feel like they're actually going along with you on this journey where you're showing them, and because that will draw them in a lot more.
I love it. So what I'm hearing and understanding, tell me if I'm hearing this and understanding it correctly, is instead of the couch was in the corner and the flowered wallpaper, as I walked into this room, this flowered room or something like that, and share an experience so that they can open up their imagination and be with you in their own vision, versus it's somehow an invitation to be part of it versus you watching it.
And also your viewpoint character, your character will see things differently or notice different things than another character. Like a teenage boy is going to notice different details than a grandmother will, and describe it totally different. So again, it's showing that character's voice, or showing what that person would notice and how that person would describe it. It's going to show something about that character without actually telling about it. You'll just get to, as you read more and more pages, you'll just get to know that character naturally without the author just sitting there telling you the things that they want you to know. It's just better to see it. Like if you were watching a movie, you don't want somebody just sitting there, a narrator just sitting there telling you everything. You want to see each scene unfold, and the tone of voice and the scenery and the setting and the costumes and all. It's the same thing in a book, where you want to just make it come alive.
I love it. So it's more of leading people in and inviting them in to want to learn more versus dumping all the information in the beginning. I love it. Show versus tell. Take us on a journey with you. And is that kind of that experience what started you into getting into editing and really helping people? Like, share a little bit about that process and how you because you still write, but the transition of writing to helping people edit. And did you teach yourself?
Yeah, so it came much later. Becoming an editor became much later. There were several years of rejection before my next book got accepted by a publisher. So that was a huge learning experience itself. And the publishing landscape was so different back then, like in the 90s and like the earlier 2000s, because self-publishing really wasn't prevalent back then. I mean, now that's another option that authors have, and it's a very good option. But back then, most authors didn't self-publish. It was before ebooks, and it was before print on demand. So that would have been an expensive process. Actually, you'd have to order several hundred copies of a book and pay it all up front and bring it to bookstores. So that I didn't have that option. So what I did was I would just constantly send query letters to agents and publishers and enter contests. And by doing that, I got a lot of feedback. There were some form letters also, but I got many letters where an agent would tell me something like, we really liked, I really like your story. I like you have a evocative writing style, but work on fleshing out your characters, or that's a bit short. Maybe work on having some more obstacles and conflict in the middle of your book. So they would always give me something to work on, and then I'd go back to the drawing board and rewrite, and then try another agent. And I also did critique groups and went to conferences. I had critiques with editors at conferences where I send my couple chapters of my manuscript, and then I sit down with an editor in a conference and get some feedback. So I just kind of learned by doing, and just basically working hard at it and being open to rewriting. And then eventually I did get an agent. So I had an agent for a couple of years, and that was valuable because then I could actually get on the phone with the agent, and she would like lead me through some ideas for brainstorming and for doing rewrites. They would actually go meet with publishers about my book, and then they would bring me feedback. For example, for my book 25 years ago today, the feedback from editors at publishing houses was that the book was too quiet and that they were looking for something edgier. So then I brainstormed with my agent on the phone for like an hour and came up with a background for the character to make her edgier. So we made her that she had insomnia and she had to take sleep medication. She was just very haunted by this incident from her past, which the incident had been in the book before, where she blames herself for her cousin's death. But to make it edgier, we really played it up and changed her character a bit so that she was just more haunted by it. It just kind of changed the tone of the book a bit. So I just learned a lot from just conversations like that, and then being able to send my rewrite and get some feedback on it from the agent on how I did carrying out those instructions. And then basically I wrote a few more books, I got published, and then I just decided when I was home with my kids, I was looking for a way to supplement my writing income and supplement some freelance writing I was doing, and I felt I had reached a point where I had something to offer other authors as far as being an editor. So I decided to just try being a developmental editor, put myself out there and see what happens, see whether I enjoyed it. And I found that I really did, and that I had just learned so much over the years that, and it's even easier to see these issues in someone else's work than your own, because you don't have anything invested in it. You're not emotionally tied to it. So that's basically how I came about that I got into editing. So it's something I really enjoy, really loving having the opportunity to give authors feedback and to brainstorm with them, just like editors and agents have brainstormed with me over the years to help me bring my manuscript further along.
I love it. And so one of the questions too, from having all that feedback and having to rewrite, have you changed, or how do you use what you received to work with new authors? Like, was some of it harsh, or the wording that you used and dealing with the way people treated you or spoke to you? Was it, because you keep saying rewrites, and so I know that for my own books, sometimes it's crushing when you are so passionate and excited about something and you want it in your book and people are like, no, and it's like, okay. And so how did you deal with that, and how do you incorporate that into really helping other people to really, because you hold this amazing container to help them express themselves in the most loving, beautiful way. Right. And as the receiver, that sometimes hurts. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think because I'm an author myself and I've been one for so long, I always say I had a lot of blood, sweat, and tears years with some of those years of rejection were tough. Because some some agents and editors were very tactful and just trying to be encouraging, whereas other letters weren't very encouraging and weren't very tactful. I even had an editor say, you've sent me a few of your manuscripts now. I think maybe I'm not the right fit for you. So, so it can be, sometimes feedback can feel like really harsh if it's not presented in a productive way, and even when it is, it can feel really overwhelming. So I just try to be really aware of that. So I'm very honest with clients. New writers, it can be hard because a lot of times people think that when they send a manuscript to an editor, the editor will just give them some suggestions and make a few changes, and that's ready to publish or to send to a publisher. And that's usually not the case. And some beginners really have no idea that how much work lies ahead of them. They just thought they were a lot further along than they really are. So it's trying to give them a lot of overwhelming feedback in a way that they don't feel like they just want to throw it in a drawer or set it on fire. And so I always try to highlight the positive things in the manuscript, because there's always positive things in it also. And I try to make it as easy as possible as far as giving them like resources where they can develop their skills in certain areas. I try to give them an overview of what they need to work on. And then I try to brainstorm a lot with them also. And I think that comes from my writing background, because my mind just naturally thinks like that. So if their character isn't as fleshed out as it should be, or I might have some suggestions, like kind of, I'll take a stab at like some different areas different things that could be motivating this character as examples. And then if they're welcome to use it, or they could just use that as a springboard to start brainstorming in their own direction, but just to give them an idea of the types of like motivation that character might need, like, or how did that character's past influence like why she's making these decisions today, or why she's in that situation today. So I think it's just a balance of really being honest, because you don't want to lead them on that, okay, this book is great, it's ready to publish now, Yeah. They're paying me to be honest and to give my honest feedback and my honest perspective on how much work will they need to put into it in order to make it publishable. So it's just trying to find that balance of being encouraging and, this has a lot of potential, and these are some of the things you're doing well, but here are some of the things that you need to work on, but please don't be overwhelmed, because this is something that so many writers have. I mean, so many writers, everybody has gone through this, and most of them, I'd say most of them, once they kind of read through the letter a few times, they're excited to tackle it and to go on to the next draft. Now and then there's somebody who feels, oh, this is a lot, and I just try to remind them, this is nothing, you can't take this personally. I have been there, every writer has been there, and this is what makes it different, the difference between writing being a hobby and writing being a profession that you're trying to make money at, you're putting out a product, and just don't take it personally, because every writer has things they need to work on, and it's usually the same things. I mean, that's why I created the class, that my book editing blueprint class, because so many authors were making the same mistakes over and over again, and I had like a file of feedback, like for show don't tell, or overused words, or the middle is kind of flat because there's not enough plot twists. I had like this copy and paste file where I would paste in just some information about that flaw, just to kind of give the author some background information about what I meant and like a definition of it. And it was just, I was pasting it into so many letters, so many different editorial letters, because really every writer is struggling with the same issue. So I think that's something that I try to make them aware of, that, it's not just you. I mean, I've given this same feedback to many other writers. So, you can do it if you want to do it. You really, it'll be some work, but if you really want to pursue this goal, I'm sure you can do it. You just have to really be determined and you know, and you're not alone. That's something I always tell them. You're not alone. So many writers have been there. So.
Well, and you brought up another very interesting topic that I know I didn't know when I wrote my first book, and a lot of people I've met don't know. There's a lot of different kinds of editing. Mm-hmm. And I know one of the courses you offer is self-editing, to really teach authors how to self-edit to get prepared to go to the editing process. So there's different editors, there's different editing processes, and it can be very costly, which again is why you offer this amazing course to help people. So can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of editing and the cost associated with it?
Yeah, so I do developmental editing, which is also called content editing. And that's where you give like a really broad overview of pretty much everything. So for a fiction manuscript, I'd be looking at the characters and the theme and the plot. Are there enough plot points? Are there any flaws? Pacing, dialogue, word choice, technique. So basically giving an overview of everything. And then I will look at things like, I can tell an author, like if some authors have a lot of trouble with grammar and punctuation. So I don't do copy editing during the developmental editing process. I might do some light copy editing, especially for an author that doesn't need to do a lot of rewrites. But for many authors, they'll need to go to a copy editor later once they've gotten their draft, their rewrite to almost like a final draft status. So developmental editing can go, sometimes it's multiple rounds of editing. Beginner writers, ideally they might need 6 or 7 rounds of editing, and usually most can't afford that. More experienced writers, any very advanced writers might be able to do it in 1 round, but the majority would be at least 2 rounds. And then the average author who's been published and kind of more of an intermediate level, they might have like 3 rounds of developmental editing. So it's not something where you just, you write your manuscript, you send it, the editor gives you some feedback, and then, okay, that's it, time to send it to the next editor. It's basically, sometimes because we're looking at so many broad things, and there's just so many things to change, often the authors will just work with that developmental editor over a few different drafts. So they'll make the changes, send it to the editor again, and then the next editorial letter should hopefully be less changes. And then another kind of editor is line editors. And now I consider myself a line editor also. I do a lot of line editing, and that's when you're, it's a little different from copy editing. Line editing is, I always say, it's more creative. So I'll be reading a manuscript, and usually I can do more line editing on a draft that's further along, obviously, because it wouldn't make sense to start changing sentences, a lot of sentences, if they're just going to have to go back and rewrite everything. So I tend to do more line editing on maybe a second, third round of, second or third time I've seen the book, I'll be able to do more line editing because the author has fixed some issues, or if it's a more advanced author. And that's just kind of pumping up their word choice, making sentences more active, trying to make sentences more vivid. If there's a lot to be done, then I would kind of give a lot of examples, but it's kind of a line that there's a line that you don't want to cross where line editing becomes like ghostwriting. I don't want to make it my book, it's their book. So, and I remember that's something that my editor Avon told me, that there's a fine line between line editing and changing your voice and style. So that's why she wanted me to do as much as I could and do as much as I could in my own before she did the final line edits. So some development editors include line editing, sometimes some don't, because that's one thing you have to watch for, so you know what you're paying for, because some authors just, some editors just have different things that they include in their services, which is fine. It's just as long as you know what you're paying for. So after you do the developmental editing, then there's some line editing, which again, your developmental editor might help you with that, or you might go to another editor for the line editing. And then there's copy editors, which would be the next step. And that's looking at your sentences more for grammar and punctuation, your commas and that kind of thing. And some copy editors also look at continuity issues, like making sure someone's hair color didn't change in the middle of the book, or street name didn't change. And for a nonfiction book, some copy editors will do some fact checking. They'll double check your facts, but not all copy editors do fact checking. So again, if you just want to make sure that you understand what the editor's going to be doing, ask questions. If you have like a nonfiction book with a lot of facts in it, you might want a different copy editor than who specializes in fiction books. So it's just, you want to kind of look at what the editor, what kind of books they're comfortable with, and ask questions if you want to make sure a certain service is covered, or how much is it to add that on. And then some authors also need proofreaders. I mean, every author needs to have their book proofread, but somebody who's better with grammar and punctuation might be able to proofread it themselves, maybe have some friends and family members look it over just for typos, whereas some authors just have so much trouble with grammar and punctuation, and there's just so many errors that I'll be honest with them that, okay, you will definitely have to hire a copy editor. You definitely have to hire a proofreader, because it's just some things come easier to some people than others. Like, I can't do math. I'm terrible at math. You have trouble with with just spelling and grammar, and that's okay. There's people that can help you with that, but you just have to make them aware that it is a big problem and that they will need to hire a proofreader. But again, not every author will have to hire a proofreader, as long as they make sure that their manuscript is well proofread. So yeah, so there's a lot of different kinds of editors and a lot of variation.
Yeah, see, I had no idea when I wrote my books about the different kinds of editors. Yeah, it was definitely a learning process.
And I think a lot of new authors think that when they send their manuscript, they think that the development editor is looking more for typos and spelling and things like that. A lot of them just think that that's what editing is. And many authors don't even send a spell check before they send it to me. And so that's something I always tell them: run a spell check before, because I can do a better job on the manuscript if I'm not constantly stopping to try to figure out what this word is. And there's at least do the spell check. And if you're paying like somebody by the hour, some editors charge by the hour. Even if you're paying a copy editor by the hour to clean up your grammar and punctuation, run the spell check, so at least you can get rid of the obvious ones.
Well, and let's go from that, because you actually offer a course on self-editing to help people save money and really do as much as they can in their own voice and really educate and prepare people. So tell us a little bit about that course and that process and what you offer people.
Yeah, it's called Book Editing Blueprint, a step-by-step plan to making your novels publishable. And I just launched it this year, although I've been working on it for a couple of years. And I think it's just really the culmination of everything I've learned over the years as a writer. And then I learned a lot as an editor also. I've been editing for about 6 years. And again, I was just seeing all the same mistakes in book after book. Just point of view issues, showing, telling, not showing, hopping into different characters' head rather than having a strong viewpoint. Lots of overused words. That is a big thing. So many authors overuse words like look and smile and walk and turn and took, and they don't realize it. And there's several on every page. And then when you have words like that, several of them on every page, your book just isn't going to be as vivid as a book that uses more stronger words. And passive writing was another big thing, where there's a lot of was and were, has had, where the story just isn't as active as it could be. So I was seeing just the same mistakes, and I was constantly, I felt like a broken record. I was telling writers, saying I edit one manuscript and then I tell the same thing to the next writer, and this, copy and paste my little spiel about, show don't tell into the next letter. And I felt badly because so many of these authors needed multiple rounds of editing, and I knew most of them wouldn't be able to afford as many as they ideally needed, because editing can cost like a few $100s per round. Some editors, it can be a lot more than that. And if you're someone who needs multiple rounds of editing, you're putting a lot of money into the book before it's even been published. And then if you're self-publishing, there's going to be more expenses later, like having a website and a cover design and formatting and book promotion. So you really want to cut down on your expenses. And so I decided to create the class, and I made it 10 modules. And it's basically just an overview of all of the most common mistakes that writers make. And it's teaching them how to think more like an editor so that they can pick up on a lot of these issues themselves before they start working with an editor. Because I would feel like almost more like a personal writing teacher or a personal writing coach more than an editor, because I was doing so much one-on-one teaching. And again, that's expensive if you're working with an editor, almost like a teacher over draft after draft. And I think it's just a much more efficient way of learning if they take a class. So for example, the first module is on character, and there's some videos, and all the videos are relatively short. Most of them are under 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. And then there's a written lecture. There's some quizzes. There's interactive quizzes where they can kind of answer different questions and see right away if they got it right, or to kind of reinforce some of the points. There's practice sheets. And then there's also sheets in each lesson that will help them to evaluate their book for these issues. So there's a character arc sheet where it guides them through making sure that their character is well developed and has a clear motivation, and that the character changes from beginning to end. Just makes them more aware of it. And then they can go on to the next module. So there's one on point of view, and I talk about first person versus third person and the common pitfalls I see with each of them. Like third person, it's a lot of head hopping. Rather than sticking to one character's point of view per scene. Many authors will just jump into multiple points of view per scene, or they'll just forget to put the scene in someone's point of view, which means that you read a scene and you're not really in anybody's head, or it's not really told from anyone. It's more like the author's point of view rather than a character's. So I just make them more aware of that. First person, a common pitfall is using a lot of making it sound more like a diary, like I. So just kind of talking about some of the common pitfalls for first person. And then there's lectures about, there's units on dialogue, the most common dialogue mistakes, pacing, plot, where I take them through the 3-act structure and making sure they have enough plot points. And many authors have a tendency to write too short, so that their middle doesn't have enough twists or obstacles for their protagonists. And so I remind them to make sure they're building toward a climax. That's something that some new writers have trouble with, where it's more like episodic, but it's not really building. And then when it finally does reach that point, many of them write it way too short. And it should really be well developed. And then they might have the resolution go on way too long, whereas that's what you want to make sure. You really want to have that build up, and it doesn't have to be like a mystery or a thriller where climax is important. Every novel needs a climax. What that is just varies depending on what genre you're writing in. And then we get into the second half of the class is line editing and copy editing. So that was a fun one to do, because I really like line editing. So I have like overused words cheat sheets, where I have like a cheat sheet of over 150 of the most common overused words. And I have some videos where I show them how to use some different spell and grammar checkers that could help them. And I show them the most common grammar and punctuation errors I see. And I remind them that this isn't going to replace the need to hire a copy editor. If you're someone that has trouble with grammar and punctuation, this isn't, you're still going to need to hire a copy editor. You're probably still going to need to hire a proofreader. But if you can, these are the most common mistakes. If you can improve on any of those, if you read this and you do these worksheets, and if you become more aware of it, if you can cut down on some of that, that will save you money later, as much as you can do on your own. And then at the end of the class, there's a 25-page checklist. I call it the book editing blueprint, where they just go through and it's a review of everything, and they can just kind of use that when they're going through their draft. And there's also a workbook, where they put all their notes, the assignments that we're just having them analyze their own manuscript for each of these areas. So they can use their workbook in conjunction with this 25-page checklist. And that's everything that a developmental editor is going to be looking for, so that they can go through it and look at each area, make sure they don't overlook anything, and try to rewrite and revise to the best of their ability. And again, I make it clear that's to the best of your ability. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you've gone through it all and when you reach a point where you just don't know what else to do, you don't feel like you've done all you can. You've looked at each one of these areas and you think you've done all you can, then that's the time to send it to an editor. And then hopefully the editor will be able to give you a more higher level edit, where they're not coaching you one-on-one about the basic issues like show, don't tell, and you're using look 300 times in the manuscript. Hopefully you will cut out a lot of that yourself, and they can kind of give you more personalized, individualized feedback that's more personal to your book, rather than just generic writing instruction.
So if what I'm hearing is that you basically have taken 25 years of experience and feedback and everything that you have learned in over 2.5 decades, and your experience and your writing and your expertise, and turned it into a 10-week or 10 module course to really save authors money, educate them, and really give new authors a path and a direction to set them up for success.
Right. And it's self-paced. And I think one thing about it is that I don't think it's an overwhelming class. There's some like revision classes you could take that would be very time consuming, where you would actually go through and rewrite your book, which could take months to rewrite your book as you're going through the class. But that's not what this class is. This is more, I tell them, you don't do any editing until you've finished, but just go through and watch the videos or read the lectures, do the assignments, evaluate your book. If you haven't written your book yet, you can use it to help you plan it out, so to help you avoid some of these mistakes. Or if you're still in the middle of the book, it might help you might save you rewrites later if you think about some of these things, like, oh, I don't really have enough obstacles in my middle, I better do that. Or I wasn't really thinking about it, in terms of the climax, or I'm not really, I don't think I'm going deep enough into my characters. Let me go, I'll have to go back and redo some of these scenes, and then I can start back where I was, and, I'll be able to write those scenes in a more direct way that gets into the character's head more. So, so basically I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Honestly, you've really shared so much about that. I want to take you in a new direction anyway, because you have so much wisdom and so much knowledge. One of the other things that I really want you to introduce people to and help really shine a light on new editors is the difference in publishing. There's so many, like you mentioned earlier, how you had to publish, and that now with the self-editing or the self-publishing options, it's totally different. Like there's been a massive shift. So what would you tell someone who is just thinking about writing a book about publishing, and how to plan financially, what to look for, what the options are, and what are the pros and cons?
So there's a traditional publishing route, and then there's the indie route. So for traditional publishing, it is very competitive. There's even less big publishers now than there used to be. And you would pretty much always need an agent to get your foot in the door with a publisher. Most publishers won't accept submissions directly from you unless maybe you went to a conference and you heard an editor talk, and then you might be able to query the editor and say, I heard you speak at this conference. But 99% of the time, you'll have to start with getting an agent. So you would send out your query letter. So you would want to write a book blurb, like a really compelling description about your book. Again, you would want to hire an editor before you even start poaching agents. And that's actually different from when I started out. I mean, back when I started out, I really don't remember hearing too much about freelance editors. I heard of like book doctors, which I guess that's the same thing, but I didn't really know anybody who had hired one. But they just, I think what's made freelance editors just really grow, and it's just the growth of the internet and the self-publishing, because now it's so easy to get your to publish your manuscript that you know, you want to make sure it's a quality manuscript you're putting out. So that's why I think that's why there's so many editors now, and now there's even less traditional publishers. A lot of them have cut back on their editorial staff. So because it's even more competitive than it used to be, and it was always competitive, most writers are hiring a freelance editor before they even query an agent. So it's something that's needed regardless of which path you plan to go down. You know, it makes sense to hire a freelance editor as the first step of the process. So then if you want to, once you've done that, if you want to go down, try the traditional route, then you would research agents. There's different directories like online where you can research agents and see what kind of books that they, what genres they represent. There's different newsletters you can get on the list, so you could see what publishers are acquiring books that might be in your genre, and then sending them a letter. And if they want to read more, usually they'll have you email a few chapters and a synopsis. So it's important to learn how to write a synopsis and make sure your opening chapters are really strong. And then if they think it might be something they're interested in, then they might ask to see the rest of it. But it can take a while to hear back. Some agents don't want you to do simultaneous submissions. They just want exclusives. And then that's always a sticky area, because what if it takes them 6 months to, you know, read your manuscript? You know, so that's something you have to decide whether you want to. I think most authors tend to just target several, wait a while to see what the response is, and then target another batch. If the agent decides to take you on, then the agent might have some suggestions for revisions, just because she knows, or he or she knows, specific editors that they have in mind who they want to send the manuscript, and they knows what these editors have said before. Just like as I was saying, like the editor that read 25 years ago today wanted something edgier. So she might say, this needs to be edgier for my context, you know, or this it might just really be specific to the context or the places she's pitching it to, that she kind of knows what they might say and just wants to fix some of those areas. And then they'll send it to publishers, and you just kind of wait and see what happens. If the publisher has feedback, the agent might send you back to do some more rewrites. It can take a while, and just because you have an agent, that doesn't mean that the agent's going to be able to sell it. So you have to, you know, if you're getting rejected a lot, you just have to, you know, see, you know, if this is your dream, how long do you want to pursue that route? But the good thing is that there is the great plan B, which is indie publishing. And for some authors, that's not their plan B. They just want to, they want to get their book out like now. They don't want to have it to go through that process for a couple of years, and they just want to kind of be more entrepreneurial and get it out there. So for indie publishing, it's very easy through Amazon, through Kindle Direct Publishing to get a book published. They have print on demand. There's also Drafted Digital, which is another place you can go through that can help you to get it out, get ebook copies out to like Nook, Kobo, the Apple Store. I think they have a print on demand option also. So, and then there's some other options also, but I think the important thing to know is that it's super easy to get an ebook on Kindle, and it's really just a Word file, and you have to make sure it's strong, because before you put it out there, open it yourself up to reviews, which you want to make sure it's a really strong manuscript, and that it has a professional cover, it's well edited, and that your book description, that everything should be really look really professional. And then print on demand is where you don't have to, it's not like where self-publishing used to be, where you had to place an order for like 1,000 books. You don't have to do that. It really, there doesn't have to be any expense to it, other than you want to hire somebody to format the book. If you're not a graphic designer, you have to format the interior and the spine, and a good cover. So you might need to hire a cover designer. So that's really the expense you'd be putting into it. Other than that, it's really no expense, because people will just order the book, and it'll get printed up for them, and the publisher will just send it out to them. And then there are some small presses, which is sort of kind of in between. It's not really indie publishing, and it's not like a big publisher that's going to get your book into bookstores, like Barnes and Noble, or there's some good smaller presses, but there's also a lot that I wouldn't recommend, because they might take a lot of your like ebook royalties, and they might not be able to get it into bookstores, your libraries either. They might not have the resources to do that, so that you want to make sure that you've checked out this publisher, and that they're going to be able to do something for you marketing wise to make it worth them having some of that royalty, and to make it worth them having the control. Because in a lot of cases, you could do pretty much the same thing that they would do. It's just some authors are really intimidated by the indie publishing process. They want somebody to design their cover. They want somebody to an editor there to tell them, okay, this is it's ready now. And they just want somebody to do the whole thing for them, to write the back cover copy and handle all the formatting and uploading it. And it can be an intimidating process, but you can do it. It's very, it's very learnable. I don't even know if that's a word, learnable, but
well, and I'm gonna have to agree with you on that, because I did self-publish through Kindle for my first book, and I did work with a publisher on my second book, and I was extremely intimidated by the process. And my first time around, I totally self-published and did the cover and everything. The second time around, I went with one of the middle of the road publishers, kind of like you said, to see to have a different experience and to see what else I could learn. Because for me, it's all about the learning experience, the learning process. Right. And yeah, to people that are out there that are interested in self-publishing, it's not as scary as it seems. The fear of the unknown is the biggest fear. And once you actually start diving into the process, it's really educational, and it is very learnable. I like that word.
Yeah. It really is. And there's so many resources, like they all, like Amazon, they all have just instructions on, another site is Smashwords, and they have like a style guide. That's another site that you can upload your books, or they'll distribute it for you to different like libraries and retailers. So all these places, they're giving you instructions, and there's lots of writing communities where you can ask questions and ask for recommendations of designers and formatters, check prices and check for testimonials. But and you just kind of have to evaluate the pros and cons of the publisher. Like I had my mystery novel 25 years ago today, wound up getting published by a small press, and this was before ebooks. So it was a good move for me then. But they also did my book Sink or Swim. But then with the rise of Kindle and everything, I had my ebook rights, so I was able to upload my ebooks, and I was doing ads with sites like BookBub. There's different ad sites where you can promote your book. And I was having some good sales, and I was getting like 70% of the royalties. And then for my next book, initially they were going to publish my my young adult book, Dark Before Dawn, but then they started acquiring ebook rights. And I decided not to go with them because in my other books, the paperback copies, they weren't getting into bookstores. Most of my sales were online. They weren't really getting into libraries because the publisher was, great to work with and everything, but they were small press. They had limited resources, and it didn't make sense for me financially to share the ebook rights with them because I was doing pretty good with that on my own, and I didn't want to. Can't remember how much they would have taken, but it just didn't make sense for me to just give that up and just take a small percentage of my ebook rights because they couldn't do it. There wasn't anything that they could do to promote it that I wasn't doing already, and I wanted to have the control of being able to set the price and to have a sale and to change the book description. I just wanted to have the control over everything.
So basically, what I'm hearing from you is when you make a decision on publishing, it really depends on what your intention behind the book is and how much control you want or how much help you want. And for each person to do their own research, and they can contact you to get information. I mean, you offer a lot of information about that. People are welcome to contact me about any of that, considering I've published a couple. But yeah, there's so much information, and that's, again, something you are willing to walk people through and kind of help them decide on a publishing route. Is that correct?
They could ask me questions about it. I specialize more on the editing aspects of it, but sometimes sometimes like a client will ask my advice, like, do you think it's worth sending, it's worth querying an agent on this? And I'll be honest with them. I mean, there's some authors that, again, like, they're more beginner level, and even if they're on their second or third round of editing, they really still need to keep working on it. And I just know that it's not going to stand out it's not going to catch an agent's attention because the writing isn't strong enough yet. That's not to say that it won't be if they work hard at it, but I'll say, like, right now it's not, it's not strong enough. But then again, they really shouldn't self-publish it either until it's strong enough.
But that's valuable. That's valuable feedback, and you're saving people, because if you publish too soon, then the heartache is going to be worse than the feedback. Like, what you're actually doing, that honesty that you're offering people is priceless. Because as an author, it hurt when people were like, you can't publish this. And I thought my book was ready. And looking back, now that it's published, I am so grateful I did not publish the versions that I thought were ready. And I think I rewrote Rewriting Your Reality probably 3 or 4 times. Like, the rewrites were, it's an intense process. So to anybody watching this, understand what Stacy's offering and the self-editing and what she's teaching. Even though it's painful in the moment and the feedback is painful in the moment, what she's offering you is a saving grace and a helping hand and this beautiful help to walk through a journey that is it's an interesting journey. I'll just leave it at that.
Definitely. Yeah. It's nice. I think it's good to surround yourself with other writers, even if it's just like on Facebook or, online, because it's something that maybe a lot of people just can't relate to, because, it's that you have this passion to tell stories or just get your books out there. And it's just nice to be around people who get it and who understand, and that you can ask questions and, get opinions from other authors. So, yeah. And I know some authors also, I do know some who have gone with smaller presses, even though I've told them, I don't think there's anything that's not reputable about this publisher, but I think, I don't see them doing anything more to promote your books than you could do if you were in indie. If you went the indie route, I just, I'm sure they're nice people, but I just don't think, if it were me, I wouldn't go with them, because I would rather have all my ebook royalties. And sometimes they just decide to go with them anyway, because they just don't want to deal with all the cover. They don't want to the cover and all the uploading to different retailers. They just wanted to write the book. They wanted to get published. They wanted to see it published. And I respect that too, as long as they're not getting, as long as it's not like a disreputable publisher that's that's going to hurt them. It's just, I would just be honest, like, I don't think, I think you could do just as much as on your own. I don't think they're probably not going to get that book into bookstores, but they've gone that route and they're happy with it, because that was really what their goal was just more to have that published book. And they do a little bit of marketing online, but not a ton of marketing. It was just more the experience. They just wanted that experience of having a published book. So you just have to look at what your goals are. I mean, is your goal, it's more your goal that you want a published book, that you want to show your friends and family, and or do you want to get on some bestseller lists, or do you want to make a lot of money from it? What are your goals? And I think you have to bear that in mind also when you make it.
Absolutely. I had to look at that. Well, the goals, and when looking at a publisher or looking to hire someone, a book coach, an editor, a publisher, just kind of like you shared with the editing earlier, get clarity on what's included. My first book, I worked with a book coach who advertised one thing, and I didn't know to ask for clarity of what was all included. And so when you're working with a publisher, an editor, anyone, ask for clarity and get in writing exactly what's included, because until you go through the process, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And I learned what I didn't know, and it was very expensive and painful. And you already mentioned this about the editing. Make sure that there's tons out there. Just really make sure you understand what's included and what's not. And that's why I love the fact that you are really putting yourself in the writer's shoes, and using your experience to really guide them. Her offerings, her classes, her self-editing stuff. She even does a free 5-day course that I will actually put. All of this stuff will be in the comments, whether this be on YouTube or Facebook or wherever this is, but links to everything Stacy offers will be below, because she really does offer a lot of resources to educate you and really help new and even intermediate or advanced authors, or writers. It doesn't even have to be about a book. I mean, you're an award-winning journalist. You offer resources and knowledge and wisdom and experience in so many different areas. She's just amazing. So
thank you.
Well, we appreciate it, and thank you for really sharing all of this. There was I'm excited to go back and rewatch it now. Do you have anything else to add?
So just if they're interested in writing, you can check out my Shortcuts for Writers website. And again, like you said, I have that free 5-day line editing class. It's called Line Editing Made Simple. And you'll get some line editing tips and lessons in your email box over several days. And then I also have a Facebook group called the Shortcuts for Writers Editing Made Simple Facebook group, and right now we're at about 1,100 members. They're from all over the world, from beginner to advanced, like best-selling authors. So it's a really positive environment. I really work to keep it positive, and it's a great group of authors there. We focus just on the crafts and the tip. We don't really talk much about the marketing end or promoting end of things, although we could steer you to groups in those areas if you ask, if you need to find more information about that kind of thing. But we do a lot about the craft of writing and editing, and we have guest speakers. We have a guest speaker coming in to do a workshop on copyright. We just had one on creativity and boosting your creativity. We had a tarot reader do something about tapping into your muse. So we do a lot of fun things. So definitely welcome to check that out. And any questions, feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much. So Stacy Juba, she goes out of her way to empower authors to really show them an amazing path and walk with them. So thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you.